Ashish, what are you able to tell us?
I'm able to tell you that this is a scathing and damning assessment of the UK government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll start reading some of the report findings. And Baroness Hallett, you were saying you're going to be hearing from her in about 6 minutes' time. That's when she'll be presenting her own findings in her own words. But this is what she had to say. She said, this is the chair of the UK COVID inquiry, Baroness Hallett. She said the response to the pandemic by the United Kingdom's 4 governments was too little, too late. All 4 governments failed to appreciate the scale of the threat or the urgency of the response it demanded in the early part of 2020. It goes on to say some 23,000 lives in England alone could have been saved had a mandatory lockdown been imposed immediately after the 16th of March. That's a week before that lockdown was actually imposed, remember, on the 23rd of March. And it says the various lockdowns of 2020 and 2021 undoubtedly saved lives, but they only became inevitable because all 4 governments got their responses wrong. It goes on to say the Department of Health and Social Care misled the public by giving the impression that the UK was well prepared for a pandemic when it clearly wasn't. And by the time the possibility of a mandatory lockdown was first considered, it was already too late and a lockdown had become unavoidable. It goes on to say the UK government introduced advisory restrictions on the 16th of March, including self-isolation, household quarantine and social distancing. But had restrictions been introduced sooner, that mandatory lockdown from the 23rd of March might have been shorter or not necessary at all. There was no lockdown exit strategy. All 4 governments didn't have one. They didn't know what to do after they imposed lockdowns. There was no planning for a second wave. None of the 4 governments gave enough attention to the possibility of a second wave, meaning there was very little contingency planning in place. And it goes on to identify the people who are most impacted by the pandemic and the government's failure to protect them. It said no consideration of the impact of lockdowns, in particular the impact on the vulnerable and disadvantaged, and the impact of school closures on the children's education and their physical and mental health. None of the governments in the UK had adequately prepared for the challenges and risks of a national lockdown. And then it goes on to say, it talks about the politics, it talks about the characters, the leadership that should have been at the heart of this response to the pandemic. It said the UK cabinet was often sidelined in the decision making. At the centre of the UK government, there was, and this is Baroness Hallett's own words, a toxic and chaotic culture, the destabilising behaviour of a number of individuals, and it goes on to name Dominic Cummings, an advisor to the Prime Minister. And by failing to tackle this chaotic culture, and at times actively encouraging it, Mr Johnson, the then Prime Minister, reinforced a culture in which the loudest voices prevailed and the views of other colleagues, particularly women, often went ignored to the detriment of good decision-making. Allegations, and this is very important because this was a very contentious point during the pandemic. Allegations of rule breaking by ministers and advisors caused huge distress and undermined public confidence. Remember, at the time, while this argument was raging, it was said that these were minor indiscretions and that they wouldn't really impact the general public. Well, that's been found not to be true. And another one, the rules. You'll remember all the confusing rules around lockdown, different regions, different areas having their own. Law enforcement by the police was practically impossible because of the confusion surrounding the rules. And the public, it says, could not follow the complexity of the rules because of variations across all 4 nations. Baroness Hallett goes on to make 19 key recommendations in her report, and she will want those implemented within the time frame she has set out. So this is the strongest possible answer by Baroness Hallett and the inquiry to all those critics who've been saying this is a very costly waste of time, that this inquiry will find very little, it will take too long, and nothing will ever change. But this is module 2. There are still at least 4 more modules to go. If after module 2, Baroness Hallett has come to this withering assessment of the UK government and all 4 nations' response to the pandemic, this will make her critics think again about being so negative about this inquiry. Just a little way away from here is a COVID memorial wall where the families of the bereaved are gathering to give their response to this report module, to this report. They want answers, they want accountability. That is not within the remit of this inquiry. But what Baroness Hallett has certainly done within this report is told us who did what wrong, who did what poorly, and who didn't do what they were supposed to do. It's easy to put names to those departments, like the Department for Health and Social Care, and those ministers who alleged indiscretions, who behaved beyond lockdown rules. All of that undermined the government response. So we know who those people were, and we'll have to wait to see what they say about Baroness Hallett's report, and the fact that she's named Dominic Cummings, named Prime Minister, or the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and the fact that they should have been taking a much stronger leadership role, but in fact they were overseeing a toxic culture right at the very heart of government.
And Ashish, you've really dug into that report after looking at it for a number of hours, and you refer to the fact that Baroness Hallett has made a number of recommendations. I mean, this is still early days in the inquiry, isn't it? We're only at, as you say, Module 2. What kind of things is she suggesting that we could be doing to not repeat the lessons of the past?
Communication. She wants to see stronger communication, stronger leadership at the heart of government, and then she wants to make sure that central UK government can talk to the regional or the devolved authorities and all work together, because clearly it was a mess from start to finish, and she doesn't want to see a repeat of that happening again.